Persephone will reflect back to you the pieces of you that you need to look at, or things that are true to you and your own life story.
Welcome back to the Diaries of a Witch podcast. My name is Angelica, and I am so excited to be here with my friend, my colleague, a fellow Hades and Persephone devotee. This is Jess Steorra, and I am so excited to chat with you. Would you mind talking a little bit about who you are, what you do, and just kind of like introducing yourself?
Sure. Well, first and foremost, thank you for having me. This has been a long time coming, so I'm just excited to be here. But for anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Jessica. I am a priestess of Persephone, a chthonic devotee, a witch, a ceremonial magician, a tarot reader, and a whole bunch of other things too. But I wound up meeting Angelica a few years ago. We took classes together, and we've been friends and colleagues since.
I remember like when we first met, I was gonna say like I love having somebody in my life because we like know each other IRL, like we met IRL, and like in the Salem area, Salem community, and it's so nice to have somebody that I know that like has like a similar magical path or is interested in the chthonic realm, interested in Persephone and Hades and all of it, right? And so I just love being able to connect with you and talk about all these things and just to come together over that. So I remember when we first met, I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm so happy that you work with similar like deities that I work with. And we were like in this class and we had to kind of like introduce ourselves, and I introduced myself as somebody who works with Hades. And I remember like just kind of like looking over at me being like, oh, there's another one.
We need more of us.
Yes, we do need more of us. I love that. So some people might know you for your amazing Instagram page, like your devotional Instagram page where you talk and post a lot about Persephone. Do you want to tell people about that page and your work over there?
Sure. So I started the Instagram account at Hekate. Let's see, back in summer 2023. I have to confess, part of it started because I was very tired of seeing Lore Olympus content all over Instagram, frankly. And not to badmouth anyone who loves that story and that iteration of Hades and Persephone. But I was looking for something there myself and couldn't quite find it, so I decided to create it. Frankly, I was also very inspired by watching the work you've done, especially with all the Hades content that you make, and really educating people as to how to connect with these deities. So that was pretty much how it started out. I've been doing it for a few years now. And honestly, it's just something I get a lot of pleasure out of doing. I'm a big nerd, and I love to research. I'm constantly reading books and academic papers about these deities and their worship. And I wanted to bring some of that to people on social media.
I love that. And that is something I definitely want to talk about more, is the research piece. But before we do that, I wanted to ask you about your big three in astrology. Could you tell us what your big three is?
Sure. So I am a Leo sun, Taurus moon, and Capricorn rising.
I love it. We're the Capricorn rising twins. I'm
obsessed. Yeah, Saturn girls,
We're the together. Saturn girls. Yes, the Saturn girls need to stick together. Exactly. I love that. Yeah, and I love the Leo and the Taurus energy. So great. If like your house is so Taurus coded. It's just gorgeous, beautiful antiques, and your altars are amazing. Like your Persephone altar is like iconic. So yeah, I can totally see that.
Thank you. Yeah, my husband is a double Taurus, so between the two of us, we make a triple Taurus, and our house
Triple
definitely
Taurus.
reflects that.
I love that. Amazing. So, could you tell us a little bit about like your, I call it like your magical origins? Like if there was anything sort of in the first part of your life, like growing up, childhood, or kind of into like teen years that like yeah, like your magical, like the first threads of your practice in a way. Like how did it begin? And was there anything in your childhood in particular that kind of yeah struck you as magical?
Yeah. My mom's side of the family is from Sicily. She was born in Catania province and came over to New York when she was about 10 years old. But that entire side of my family is very uh, kind of mystical. None of them would actually say that outright, but growing up, I heard a lot of Sicilian folklore. I heard a lot of very strange family stories about some of the characters in Sicily. In particular, my uncle Carmine, uh, was very much a seeker. He's the patriarch of that side of the family, and he took a lot of time, especially when I was young, to like expose me to some of the folklore, the mythology, and that definitely had a very big impact on me growing up because I, started to look at things and, want to know more about what's underneath them, and kind of get the uh, the hidden stories there, if you will. And that's pretty much how it started out for me. In my mom's extended family, her great aunts, and then going back, were all either midwives or herbalists or healers. So I like to think that there's something there in the family. It just, skips generations sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that's definitely something that I feel was kind of there as a latent interest, if you will, that came to me at the right moment in my life
Mm.
and pretty much brought me to the path I'm on now.
I love that. Yeah, and I'm already like making connections, right? Because you're Sicilian, and the I mean, so much of Persephone's lore and mythology like takes place in Sicily. So that is so cool, so interesting. I'm Italian as well. I'm not Sicilian, but my family is like like a little bit north of Naples, so it's still I think it's still considered like southern Italy, but
It is.
it's not Sicily. Yeah, I love that. Um, so that's so cool. So tell me when like you started to learn about paganism or the occult. What were like the first things you learned about, and when did that happen?
So I think my interest kind of officially started when I was about 11 or 12 years old. Actually, I was at a bookstore with my mother. We used to go to, I can't remember what the name of it is now, but it was right by the grocery store. So I always used to go with her so I could, go there afterwards or beforehand and talk her into buying me a book. At that age, um, I discovered Scott Cunningham's books on Wicca. That was sort of the first thing that really called out and spoke to me. It was like everywhere in the 90s. So, usually
Mm-hmm.
Wicca was the, I think, gateway into this for a lot of people. And the book actually like fell into my hands off the shelf. It was kind of a weird thing. That's only happened to me twice in my life, and that was one of the occasions. But I saw this book called "The Truth About Witchcraft" today, and
Mm-hmm.
I look at this cover. I have it here somewhere. Unfortunately, I don't have it pulled out at the moment. But on the cover, there's this like very chic, very cap rising kind of dark haired businesswoman, right? And she's there kind of as this emblem as to what a modern witch could be. And at age 11, I saw that and was just sort of captivated by it. I was like, I want to be her. And I showed my mother the book and asked her, Mom, can I get this? And she looks at the book and she kind of looks at me and pauses for a moment. She's like, all right, that's fine. And that was pretty much how that journey started out for me. I definitely kind of took a lot of the traditional roads of exposure, if you will, like Mists of Avalon, or frankly, Silver Raven Wolf, like all of these, kind of 90s blockbuster, Wiccan figures. And, the funny thing kind of about my path is that I was a very kind of hands-off witch or pagan for many years. My 20s, I was working a pretty intense job in healthcare and kind of had that as the main focus of my life. Didn't really have much time for anything else. But life circumstances have a way of, even if it's a roundabout way, of bringing us to where we need to be. And in my late 20s was when I really started seriously practicing witchcraft and, I guess starting upon what I would call my path.
Yeah, I think that that's a big question that people ask me is like, I feel like so many people want to have their path figured out. Like they're like, yep, I don't know which deities I want to work with or what type of witchcraft or magic I'm interested in, but I want to figure it out. Like I want to have it like done. And I found I got into witchcraft as a teenager and was like obsessed with it and was like, okay, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to spend all my time doing. This is what I want my career to be, which is hilarious to think. But I always say to people, like, you kind of just have to let like life take you and like let books fall into your hands and let things happen and let things unfold. What do you think about it when you reflect on your path and sort of how you've gotten to like this point now? What would you say to people about finding their path?
Okay. I would say you have to let it evolve. Nobody shows up seeking and gets the answers right away. And I think, a healthy amount of curiosity and, exploration is essential. I try to encourage people to look at whatever resonates with them and start there. But I do believe there is something to getting out into the world and kind of living your life and, maybe learning some lessons here and there, and allowing that to inform, the direction that you take. It's funny because, again, life is a big circle or a big spiral. So, I always also tell people never say never about what you choose to do because, I recall like even a moment about a decade ago when I first started getting, back into witchcraft hardcore and, had started to look at high ritual magic a little bit and was like, oh, I'll never do that. It seems really complicated. But, within probably a year and a half time, I was, interacting with angels and doing, the lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram. So, never say never with your path because you never really know, what door is going to open, even if it doesn't seem like the right one at the time.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that point, and that is so real. Like, sometimes I'll even say to myself, like, nowadays, like, oh yeah, I'm, like, not interested in that. And then I literally go, okay, I need to write this down because that just me saying that means that I'm probably going to be interested in it in like a year and a half.
Totally.
Or something. Like, it's almost like I clock it as like, okay, yeah, okay, Angelica, that's,
Yeah.
you're
Mental
not
note,
interested.
like,
Yeah.
we'll return to this one, you know?
Yeah. And sometimes it's just like I don't feel ready for it, or I'm like, ooh, like this is cool, but I just do have like no capacity for that right now. So I felt that way about herbs for a long time, where I was just like, herbs are cool. I wish I knew more about them. I don't feel like they're for me, but maybe one day. And now I really like herbs, and they're, it's definitely something that I still don't know a ton about, but as far as like magical correspondences, I feel like I've done a lot in terms of like learning about those in the last couple of years. And I also think that this kind of resonates with Persephone for me. I never said I would never work with her, but I'd worked with Hades for like about 7 years, like as a devotee. And I would always, before I met Persephone, and I would, give her offerings and try to involve her as best I could. Like, I wanted to be respectful, but I just never felt like the call from her or that she was there. Like, I feel like I would pick up the phone and try to place the call to her, and it would just be like dead on the other line for 7 years. And so that was something for me where I was really shocked when she came into my life. And so, yeah, I totally agree with you.
Yeah. I think Persephone in particular, and I feel like this has been the case in my life. I'm sure it's been kind of the case in your life too, based on what I know. She tends to show up after a big rite of passage. For me, I, basically considered myself a non-theistic pagan. I didn't work with any of the gods for the first 15 years or so of my practice. And when I got back into witchcraft and kind of started working on that path again, um, I had just gotten married, and I like to think that that was part of the door that needed to open there. And I know that's also the case with your situation. So I like to think she maybe sometimes waits until we're in the right space, or waits until we've had certain experiences, in order to come in and to teach us the things we need to know.
Yeah. I definitely think that that was the case for me. I like you said, I got into contact with her a couple of months after I got married, and it was really funny. I was just doing a normal ritual. I got married in the spring, and then in the summer that same year, I was just doing a ritual, and I just felt like the energy change. I was doing like an evocation of Hades, and I was like, okay, Hades is here, but there's also somebody else here. And it was really like, I was kind of like scared at first. I was like, oh no, what terrible thing has occurred? Like, you know what I mean? You just don't know what's happening, and you're like, what happened in this evocation? And then I pulled a card, and it was it was in the playing card deck. So it was like the Queen of Clubs. And I had like drawn some like flowers on that card, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is Persephone. And yeah, it was like you said, it was right after I got married. So you said that that's also similar to your timeline. How, like, what was it like when Persephone entered your life? You said you were kind of like non-theistic beforehand, so was she like the first deity that you came into contact with in a big way?
So what's funny about my connection with her is that it actually occurred through another deity, Hekate. Hekate was the first goddess I had any contact with, and I was not anticipating it. It happened unexpectedly. About a month and a half after I got married. I had never had gnosis in any deep way before this. So it definitely caught me by surprise. But, I had a moment during a thunderstorm late at night. It was actually on the new moon in November 2013. And I was laying in bed just listening to the rain. It was late. And this clap of thunder came, and it shook me from like my whole being, basically. And along with that clap of thunder came Hekate. And, she was honestly, pretty stern with me the first time. She basically asked me if I was ready to listen to her. After that, my world kind of blew open. I started doing a lot of research on Hekate, who I didn't really know that much about beforehand. I just knew that she was the goddess of the crossroads and goddess of magic. And then in researching Hekate, the introduction to Persephone came. And, it's funny, I definitely went through a Greek mythology phase in middle school. But Persephone's myth was not the one that resonated with me at the time. So in some ways, in researching Hekate and then Persephone by extension, it was sort of almost like my first real introduction to her in a meaningful way. And, at the time, I'd just been through a lot of big life changes. My wedding, was wonderful, but it was also kind of a stressful event. I'm an only child, so my mom, had like very clear opinions about how she wanted the wedding to go and, kind of her vision for that. So her and I, bumped heads a lot. And that, was pretty much our pattern, throughout my lifetime. We're very, very connected, but also, very different, that led to a good amount of friction. So I kind of felt like when I started working with Persephone and just, light a candle for her, sat there kind of just absorbing and reading everything I could about her, it was almost like I was handed this key to understanding aspects of my life that I had yet to fully comprehend. The patterns there between me and my mother, the history of Sicily in and of itself is kind of a long torrid affair. So it was sort of like I was given this key to my past and to understanding things about myself that up to that point I hadn't really looked at. And that was how it all started for me. I didn't approach it with, I'm going to go become a priestess or I'm going to be, her like number one fan or something. I just wanted to learn everything I could about her and myself, weirdly enough, by extension. And it's been a wild, crazy ride.
Yeah, and I like with Hades, he's like my primary deity. He's just like so important to me. And I remember when I first came into contact with him, I was very young. I was like a teen, and I wanted like paganism to work for me. Like I resonated with it. I was definitely like motivated by the fact that I like wanted to find a deity like all the other pagans on the internet or whatever. I was like, ooh, this is cool. I want to do this. But that's I think what set Hades apart from other deities that I was like, oh, maybe this deity I could have a relationship with, or maybe this deity, is I just felt like this intrinsic connection to him that I like could not explain, and yet I felt like he had a lot of things that I wanted or needed, or like he had this like information or this wisdom to distill on me, even though I didn't really like know what that was yet. And it was just so perfect. And so that is something I would totally also give as advice to folks, is like, it's totally okay to want a connection with a deity or to seek a connection with a deity, but there's also like this part of it where a lot of it is just so involuntary and so like faded, and it's just like about like opening yourself up. And I even like what Hekate said to you around are you ready to listen? Like that's so interesting, but it makes sense. It's like she's asking you like, are you ready? Like are you open to this? And so yeah, I love that. What would you give as far as advice for people who are curious about Persephone or want to start working with Persephone?
I know for me, when I was, first starting out on my path, the easiest way that I found to connect with her was just by exposing myself to as many of her myths, her artifacts, her images, even retellings, or at least the good ones.
Yeah.
Just kind of saturating myself in all of those, materials, whether it's modern media or, things from the ancient past. I found helps me really solidify that connection. And that's part of why I honestly created my Instagram account,
Mm-hmm.
because I feel like even just, looking at the pieces of art that resonate with you, or artifacts, or places, in the Mediterranean, those can be doorways. And frankly, also, don't doubt what you're experiencing. I think that that is so important. And I see a lot of people online, asking, like, is this a sign? Is this real? Am I imagining it? And, I like to think that whatever you're seeking is already seeking you.
Mm-hmm.
So the very fact that you're even there looking for a connection, is usually a pretty good sign that there is something, that wants your attention. It might be a deity connected to the deity that you want to,
Mm-hmm.
establish contact with. It could be, a magical path that you'll wind up walking down. The important thing is to just trust what you're experiencing. And frankly, you know, just keep taking steps forward bit by bit.
I love your point about how sometimes it's not like that exact deity or that exact magical path, but you're still kind of drawn there because eventually you're gonna get something out of it or something. Because I feel like this happens constantly, and I even like I even see this working out in so many things that I've done in my magical practice or classes that I've taken. I feel like even the class that we met in, it's like there was just so much that came out of that I couldn't have possibly understood at the time of me like signing up for it. And yeah, it just is this total evolving process. So I love that. Um, so something I really wanted to talk about and ask you about, because this is endlessly interesting to me, and it's also something that I get asked a lot, and I get, it gets brought up a lot in my comment sections on my reels. But I feel like there's a lot of conversation about Hades and Persephone. Like their myth either resonates with people, or it can sometimes make people uncomfortable. It definitely brings up a lot of emotion in people. It's something that I've noticed. It's very popular in that way. And I feel like with Persephone in particular, there's just like a lot to be said about her and her connection to Hades. And I just noticed that there's this like online discourse about her that's very like it's almost like trying to explain what she feels or how she thinks about the situation, or what her views are on mythology, and there's just, like in her mythology. And there's so many, like I see it in my comment section all the time. It's just people like arguing with each other about how Persephone feels about what has occurred in her lore. And it just, I thought to myself one day, like, I wonder what Persephone like thinks about this idea that everyone is almost trying to like tell her story or rewrite her story, or even in all the retellings. So is this something that you've noticed, and sort of how do you like, what do you think about yeah, like all of the different voices around, Persephone and her experience?
So it's a very good question. I think honestly, and this is maybe coming from more of the chaos magic side of things. Um, I believe all the myths are true, every single one. I think usually when people come in with really strong or polarized opinions about Persephone and her story, they're not even really talking about her, they're talking about themselves. Um, you know, Persephone actually has a elemental association with water. And one of the interesting things about water is that, depending on the container you put it in, it's going to, its shape is going to change. So she, I think in particular, is a deity who could be very fluid. The Persephone that the ancient Locrians, worshipped was maybe not the Kore of the Eleusinian mysteries or Nestus of Sicily. Or even going back further into, Potnia Theron, or even Ereshkigal, Sumerian myth. I think Persephone will reflect back to you the pieces of you that you need to look at, or things that are true to you and your own life story. So I try not to, um, take a hard and fast uh, approach to what her truth is. I think her truth is multifaceted. And depending on who you are and what you've been through, you know, a different piece of that story may or may not resonate with you. And the bottom line is that it's all valid. In the ancient world, yes, there were, the Homeric hymn to Demeter, there's the Orphic hymns, there's all these other texts that, give us a glimpse into the myth, so to speak. But, ancient opinions were not unified either. The Locrians thought Persephone stayed in the underworld year round. They thought she was down there, she loved it. She was their, mistress of marriage, and, you know, that is how they viewed her. That is the role she took on for those people in their lives. Locri was located in southern Italy, so I think that, you know, maybe if you ask a southern Italian or Sicilian, they might have a very different opinion about what aspects of her myth to focus on, or the things that they consider most important. But it really is a very individual thing, and I feel like that's one of her strengths. She's a bit of a chameleon in that way.
Mm-hmm.
So you know, I would say take what resonates. If it doesn't resonate with you, leave it behind. That's okay.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. I'm obsessed. Yeah, and I have the same opinion about the Hades side of things. Is like I some people might think I'm somebody who is like all positive all the time when it comes to Hades and his depictions, and I actually don't like that. And I think that sometimes there are people that, yeah, like they're almost like trying to defend me in the reels. They're like, no, Hades didn't do this or whatever, or Angelica doesn't think that Hades did this. And I'm like, I agree with you. I think that all of the ways of viewing it are true. Like everything has truth to it. There's obviously a reason why certain depictions have come through, or certain types of tellings of the myth have come through. And I love, and I always say this when I'm talking about Hades and Persephone, like if you resonate with Hades as somebody who has wronged Persephone and who is like a bad person, or a bad deity or whatever, then I'm totally fine with that. Like that is, I want, like you said, I want you to take what resonates. And if that's like deeply resonating with you and doing something for you and bringing, helping you heal from something, it's like, I'm totally fine with that. And I think Hades is fine with that. And so, yeah, it's like similar to what you're saying with Persephone, where it's like the both of them have a lot of these chameleon qualities. And Hades is like the fire and Persephone is the water. And so it makes sense that there's like this, yeah, like this, it's like the temperance card. Like it just makes sense that there's this, unity and multiplicity and mutability of what they represent together.
Absolutely. I think even if you look at the nature of the underworld, and this is coming from a Kabbalistic standpoint, it's associated with Yesod, the realm under the moon. And the moon is mutable. The moon changes. The moon fluctuates, that's something I think a lot of people maybe don't think about, is that, there is a fluid nature to
Mm-hmm.
who they are and what they represent. To go back, I can't remember when you said this to me, Angelica, but it stuck with me, so I want to say it. I think you and I had been having a conversation about again, Hades kind of bad boy reputation, right? And you're like, you basically said to me, you're like, he's fine with being the bad guy. Like he'll take it. He'll take whatever you want to throw at him. It it's not the point of the myth. The point of the myth is not a good guy and a bad guy. The point of the myth is cycles. The point of the myth is, evolution on a spiritual level. Ascribing very simplified moral judgments to myth is usually can only take you so far. So again, I think if somebody has been hurt and it helps them to view, let's say, Persephone as a female figure of empowerment who's overcome, assault and things that have hurt and changed her, that's a beautiful thing. And I wouldn't want to take that away from anyone. Exactly. At the same time, and I'm speaking from personal experience, like, Hades in particular is amazing for allowing you to really get in touch with that shadow side of yourself, your animus. I don't know how much you and I have talked about the animus, but I know I think we're kind of on the same page with a lot of our thoughts there. And, I found that, starting to work with Persephone, Hades kind of came along with that package for me. And that was sort of the focus of my work with him, was being able to kind of come in touch with this part of me that had been hidden, or repressed, and being able to find the treasures buried there.
Yeah. Oh, I completely agree. Yeah. And because he's so good with the shadow, it's like there has to be a reason for that, right? And I think it's because his energy, is able to hold all of the shadowy perceptions and everything. And I think he's just so important as a representative of that, because those things exist in our world, those things exist in our lives, in ourselves, and so many people are so interested in things like shadow work and things like trying to decode and understand like their patterns. And I mean, who better to do that with than Hades and Persephone, especially since they represent those intergenerational patterns, or like that's something that they can really help with, right? You literally see that, you see them processing that. I even like everyone talks about Persephone and Demeter, which obviously very important, we love them, but like Hades and Kronos like have like the lore. I mean, he's the firstborn son, first to be eaten. He's hanging out in the belly of Kronos, watching his siblings be born. That's my personal like I feel like that's why he ends up being the underworld god, is because he's just spent his entire life up to that point like in the dark bowels of Kronos, and he comes out and he's like, okay, I'm gonna go back there. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something I think is maybe not discussed enough, that Hades himself and his siblings by extension all have trauma.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone's ever done like a deep dive there in terms of the psychology, or maybe the mental health of the gods, but definitely be an interesting thing to read. And honestly, I completely agree with you. I think Hades is this figure who can encompass all of these things. That's the beauty of working with these chthonic deities, is that they can almost hold space for us as we become whole, and get in touch with the whole spectrum of our emotions, our thoughts, the things we're here to do, our dreams, our fears, etc. That's something that I think is, something people shy away from in this world, but it's something, especially as a spiritual practitioner, at some point or another, you're going to have to confront the shadow, and you're going to have to bring light into that dark part of yourself. So,
Mhm.
who better to work with, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So you are somebody who has been working with the deities that you work with for a long time. How do you continue to evolve in your relationships with whether it be Persephone or other deities? How do you continue to like feed the fire of their connection and evolve in the connection?
So, what I like to do, especially in terms of the deities that I'm devoted to, I try to establish, some sort of a routine practice where I make offerings to them. For example, with Hekate, I'll always celebrate, the dark moon for her and do a dinner for her. Um, some of the other deities, are we have more of a loose relationship. Like Hermes, for example. He pops up, and sometimes he's there all the time, and then other times I won't see him for a while. I think being able to be flexible and know that not every deity is going to be there all the time. Depending on what you're going through in your own life, there might be a deity who steps up to help you get through an obstacle or a challenge of some sort. I feel like, as well, the more people can continue to read and learn about these deities, you know, the history and the myths are so rich and it's pretty endless. So the more you can kind of, explore that, I think the more that opens up different facets of those deities for you to, you know, um, connect with and communicate with. But I think, to a degree, there are moments in everyone's practice where you feel disconnected, or maybe you get tired of the routine you've been doing every day. And in that case, I think the best thing to do is switch it up a little bit.
Mhm.
I have a lot of fixed sign energy in my chart. So I'm one of those people that, for better or worse, I can get stuck in a pattern. And, I think depending on the type of person you are, sometimes you got to take a risk and bust out of that and do something unexpected. For people who are a little bit more like loose, it might help them to really hone in on a routine or a, kind of set devotional practice. And again, that can change over time too. Some deities aren't meant to be with us forever. Sometimes they show up and they do their thing, and then they might take a step back, and you might not hear from them for a while. And that's that's fine. That's part of the
Mhm.
process. That's part of your journey with them. And I think you know try not to compare your journey too much with other people's journeys because everything's going to be different. So you know try to keep it fresh. Don't force things. I think that's important. um, and definitely just be open.
Mhm.
Something I see a lot with people practice is everyone wants to nail things down. Everyone wants to have a straight answer. And some things, mysteries aren't necessarily equipped with straight answers. They're mysteries. Don't have too many expectations off the bat. Let things unfold naturally. And
Yeah.
you know, um, again, don't doubt things either. Trust the steps that you're taking forward. Sometimes it seems like, maybe it seems like you're walking backwards at sometimes, but there's a pattern there too. There's lessons there too. So,
Mhm.
that's my 2 cents on that, I guess.
Yeah, I love it. It resonates. And I think it's helpful for people to realize that, you know, both of us are people who teach and talk a lot about the deities that we love and are devoted to. But there's still times where disconnection happens, or I even like the way you put it, where like you're just the routine, you're like, oh my gosh, the routine, not this, not this again. Um, and it's time to switch it up or something. It's like that is so common. And yeah, I mean, we're working with these like very complex, like multi-dimensional, like divine like entities. Like I feel like time might not even be they're not like seeing time the way that we're seeing time. Things can just filter into your paradigm from these deities suddenly, or maybe over a long period of time for some people. So yeah, it's so good to be open. And I think too, it's like allowing yourself to experience and know what it's like to be like tapping in with divine in some way, like having like some type of like theurgical practice, even if it's not like specifically with a deity or something. Like I have a friend who, she does this like silence practice where she just like, I sit for 5 to 10 minutes a day if if I can, and I'm silent and I'm not trying to talk to deities or anything. I'm just open to whatever might come through, or to nothing. Like it's just sort of my vow of silence for 5 to 10 minutes. And I think those moments can definitely, or those types of practices, any type of like theurgical work, even if it's unspecific, that connects you with the divine, are moments where you can break barriers with deities and just be able to connect and communicate.
Absolutely. I love that idea of having a silence practice, honestly. I think that's so cool. And I think, again, meditation is a building block. It's a foundation of spiritual practice. I've seen discourse online, saying, "Oh, meditation is not a traditional part of a, Reconstructionist practice." But just because the ancients didn't do it doesn't mean it won't help you. I
Yeah.
think that's something that is really important, is recognizing that we're not going to be able to do everything the way they did it. We live in a very different time, very different influences. We have a different understanding of the world. But there are certain things that, I think are essential, and being able to quiet your mind is at the top of that list. So the
Mm.
more people can, sit in that state of stillness and receptivity, just like the high priestess, the more we're going to get, in terms of that connection to the other side of themselves. Not to sound too new agey or anything, but
No, I'm obsessed. And it's so funny, the meditation thing, because I mean, my response to that is like, well, they were constantly like meditating because they didn't have like phones and they didn't have like other stimulation. Like, I mean, you know what I mean? Like, I'm sure the
yeah,
ancients were doing, like, they had a lot of practice with silence and a lot of practice with like, okay, it's dark. Like, now I'm just going to sit here, or I'm going to go to bed, or I'm going to, say my prayer that I've memorized or whatever. And so it's like, it is a little harder, I think, in the modern world, so I think it's important to sort of intentionally, and I mean, I'm somebody I work online, I'm online all the time, and and I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, or like, I think that sometimes there's this misconception that like you have to be like locked away in like a monastery in order to get these like downloads, and it's like, no, I'm just a woman. I'm a wife. I'm a cat mom. I'm an Instagram person. I have a podcast. Like, I do all these things that are like very mundane and modern, but I still find meditation and silence and those things really intrinsic and important, because like we said, like, it's just, there's so many loud, stimulating parts of my day-to-day experience that I almost need to like counteract with a more intentional practice, where that was probably not the case for the ancients.
absolutely. I mean, online, it often seems like people are just yelling at each other. So that's not usually a conducive thing to, stillness and calmness. I don't know. Maybe for some people it is, but I think unplugging, you know, getting out in nature, that's another thing I think, especially with regards to Persephone, that can be a really nice way to, um, to connect with her, is by going out, several times a week to, whether it's a park or just something locally where you can get away from people and be, amongst trees and, maybe by the ocean, like here in Salem, being in a place where you can be back in touch with the natural world and watching the changes of the seasons, that's
Mm.
huge. I know, like, when I, got back into witchcraft, like, that was a foundation for me. Was just spending as much time outdoors as possible, getting to know the land, sitting out there in stillness. And, over a long enough period of time, it really does, I think, to some extent, kind of rewire your brain a little bit. I don't have any evidence to back that up other than my own personal experiences, but um, I think there's something there that we have forgotten, and the more you can expose yourself to nature, the more you'll get out of it. Absolutely.
Mm. Absolutely. Yeah, I love that point. And it's nature is so like I think we don't realize how it impacts us until we go there and we're like, "Oh yeah, I get it now." This does feel good. I suddenly, yeah, like you said, my brain is rewired. Like I suddenly get it. Like I feel it. I feel good. Um what are some like points of the year or maybe even like specific dates or festivals that you use in your devotional practice with Persephone?
So for Persephone, I like to spend the time leading up to and then the time after the equinoxes is just that's her time, right? I've been asked, I think, more than once at this point when I feel her most strongly, throughout the wheel of the year. And for me, I think the equinoxes are just that's the strongest time she comes through. Um, I kind of like to use the pagan wheel of the year as sort of an overlay just for
Mm-hmm.
how I kind of break down my calendar, and the things I focus on. But again, that might not work for everyone. If you're like hardcore reconstructionist and you want nothing to do with that, I feel like um, that's valid. You know, um, the thing I think is most important is also knowing your own cycles and figuring out when you're most receptive to her energy, and that can change too. Um, I feel like a very different aspect of her comes through in the winter solstice. That is a very different Persephone even than Persephone you're going to get, around harvest time in the summer when she's with Demeter. So,
Mm-hmm.
I think the beauty of a goddess like Persephone is that there really is a facet of her for every season. And, she is a goddess who is kind of, I think, perpetually evolving.
Mm.
And, you know, it's a beautiful thing to be able to, kind of evolve with her and allow that to, inform your own practice and what you're doing.
Yeah. I always say like with Persephone and Hades, I think just like living your life and like having experiences and having rites of passage, even if they're small and celebrating the seasons, like those things are like devotional in nature to Hades and Persephone because I think that they've always like wanted to help mortals with those things that they have rulerships with those things, death and life and marriage and all these different transitions and milestones. And so even when you're like in those moments where you're like life is happening, people are like, oh, just life happened, I don't know I didn't get to the altar, life happened. It's like, well, I think for Hades and Persephone in particular, like those can be great times for you to reflect on those times and maybe dedicate that reflection to Hades and Persephone, of okay, this is what it felt like to experience that, or I'm literally like rooting my practice in these kind of mundane things, but I'm allowing like this layer of reflection to make them to make these things sacred, or at least feel sacred or be sacred in hindsight. So yeah, and I think that's why me and you and I think so many other people, like, yeah, we found these deities during these big transitional moments. And maybe it's just true for like chthonic deity in general. I don't know. There could be a connection to the chthonic realm in terms of these crossroads, these transitions, or just the nature of Hades and Persephone ruling over all different types of life transitions.
Absolutely. Um, I 100% agree with you, and I love the idea of, you know, maybe there is a blockage or barrier to your practice, and instead of beating yourself up about it, you're going to use that as a vehicle to go deeper. That's huge, and I think a lot of us, we can be so hard on ourselves and thinking we have to have it all figured out and it all has to be perfect all the time. Some of, I think, the most powerful rituals that can be done are the ones that are done, on the cuff, unexpectedly. And, again, I think it's being receptive and open to whatever's coming to you at that time is in itself like, a bridge, and not putting the weight of our own expectations, whether we meet them or not, onto what we do, as practitioners, as devotees. Things evolve, we evolve, and, the gods are there to help us evolve. I really believe that. I know that's not necessarily something everyone believes in, but I think especially in regards to Hades and Persephone, like they care. If you're a devotee, they will protect you. They will, go out of their way for you. Again, I'm speaking from my own personal experiences, but I think that trusting that is important and not diminishing, your own role and your own place in that reciprocal relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, because I believe that, I'm going to see these deities someday. And they're like, it's just so beautiful to have this like lifelong or maybe you work with them for a certain amount of time, this practice, this relationship that evolves. And yeah, I think it's so special. And I could talk to you about this for hours, and we have.
I know.
we often do. So where can people find you? And yeah, do you have anything going on right now that you want people to know about?
So for right now, the best way to get in touch with me is over Instagram. I have my Arhetos Kura account. That's the Persephone devotional page. I'm honestly on that way more than I'm even on my own personal account. But you can also find me on my personal account, which is Miss Steorra. I'm looking forward to doing a few classes over the next year, both in person here in Salem and then online. And frankly, I am very open to, any kind of feedback. If you want to hit me up and just say, hey, I have a couple questions, that's awesome. I'm more than willing to, help you in any way I can.
I love it. I love it. I'm so excited. I won't say what it is, but we have something brewing.
Yes, we do.
Yes, something that you'll hear about very soon, all of you. So I think everyone's going to be so excited about what we're working on together. But so stay tuned for something that me and Jess are both collaborating on in regards to Persephone and chthonic worship and everything like that, and cycles. So thank you so much for coming on. Thank you so much for talking. Yeah, it was just so great to have you.
Thank you, Angelica. It was great being here. And, I look forward to all the things we have in store.
Me too. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and bye.